Hey everyone, it's your girl Jen, and I am back with some book recommendations. I read quite a number of them last year, and I wanted to share 10 books that really shook up my life perspective and made me look at life more positively. So if you are a person that decided to read more as one of your New Year's resolutions, this is the video to watch. So let's get started. So the first book I have for you is called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. I think this is a book that everybody on the planet should read, especially if you're an overthinker like me. I know I'm not the only one that has that annoying voice in your head that is constantly making commentary about life. I mean, sometimes the voice is pretty funny and helpful, but the majority of the time it's just noise. And Michael Singer does a really great job explaining that that voice in your head is not you. He refers to it as your roommate. It's your roommate that you basically have to live for the rest of your life. And he explains that you are the person that is just listening to it. I like to reread this book, especially when I'm feeling anxious about my life or if I tend to overthink a situation. I'll just bust open a chapter and it really helps ground me and makes my foundation a lot more strong. So recommendation number 2 is called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. This is a book that I really wish was assigned in school because I feel like it would have made me a lot more centered and confident. But this book explains 4 rules that we should all live our lives by. The 4 agreements are: number 1, be impeccable with your word. Number 2 is to not take anything personally. Rule number 3 is to never make assumptions. And the last rule is to always try your best. I can find any life problem and it can be redirected to the 4 agreements. So let's say Ben and I get into an argument and he uses a tone with me that just really unsettles me. I would go back to rule number 2, which is to never take anything personally, because chances are he has a tone because he's got another separate problem that is his and I am unrelated to it. Let's say I have a creative block with work and I feel super uninspired. I can go to rule number 4, which is to always try your best. So I love that all my life problems can be solved within one of these 4 agreements, so I highly recommend that you guys go read it. So my third recommendation is called The Power of Habit, and I swear this is the last self-help book on this list. I just had to throw it out there because, you know, if you're the type of person who wants to finish their goals, become more disciplined, and become more of an efficient person, this book is great. I learned from this book that over 65% of the things that you do on your day-to-day life is run on autopilot, aka the habits that you create in your life. So if all the habits in your life are positive ones, then you can just daze into life and be productive without even trying. And so that thought really excited me. So the author does a really thorough job explaining how habits are created. It's a chain reaction of 3 events. It is the cue, the routine, and the reward. And if you are wanting to change a habit, it's all about changing the routine. Whether it's a habit on smoking or drinking too much or binge eating, they all can be reformed by just changing the routine. And so this book really helped me re-examine my life and made me want to change all my habits for the better. I was obsessed with thrillers last year. I read so many of them, and I think the queen of suspense is Gillian Flynn. I read all her novels last year, but my favorite was Dark Places. So this is a story of a girl named Libby Day, and her devil-worshipping brother allegedly killed her entire family when she was a child. She was only I think 5, so the memory is really fuzzy for her. But basically her brother's in jail and there is this cult following that is obsessed with the case. A lot of people think that her brother is innocent, and as Libby lives her life, she realizes that she has to really figure out what went down on that night. This book is super juicy, very suspenseful, and if you like murder mysteries, you're gonna love this book. So next up, I have The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. This is my gateway book that got me sucked into thrillers. But basically this story is about a woman named Amber who really wants to marry rich, like filthy rich. So she has her eye on this wealthy hotshot named Jackson Parrish, but unfortunately He's already married. So this is when Amber installs her home wrecking plan. She befriends Daphne, she like incorporates her into her life more, and eventually you will see how she steals her man. It's like raunchy, it's got sex, it's got mean girl thoughts, and it's just very satisfying to read. This will absolutely keep you up late at night, and I think this is great if you have like a period of time you want to kill very fast. So whether it's a long flight or if it's just like, I don't know, a commute that you have, I think this is a book that you should read. So my next book favorite I've spoken about pretty recently, but I had to call it out again because it's fresh on my mind and I really stand behind what I said about it. It is called Room by Emma Donoghue, and this is by far the most uniquely written book I've ever read. It's all in the perspective of a 5-year-old boy named Jack. And to Jack, his only world that he knows is in this 11-foot by 11-foot room. And the story is actually quite tragic. So his mom gets kidnapped 7 years ago by a complete stranger, and he keeps her confined in this garden shed that is soundproof, it's lock-proof, and she ends up burying his child, and that ends up being Jack. It's a really fucked up situation, but she actually raises Jack pretty well. You get to see their daily routine, and just the bond that they have is just unreal. This is also a movie that is out. You can watch it on Netflix. I think this is a rare occasion where the book and the movie are just as good, so I recommend you checking them out. So my next recommendation is also something that I mentioned pretty recently. It's called Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I wanted to talk about this book because it's one of those reads where after I read it, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So this book is a historical fiction about the time when Korea was under Japanese rule. And it was by far the darkest times in Korean history. And no one ever really talks about it. It's kind of like this weird, forgotten part of history. I never learned it in my history classes or anything. I think that a lot of people will be quite shocked to see what the treatment was like for Koreans. Koreans were considered lazy, disposable, third-rate citizens, and they were just in these inhumane conditions. And I think this book does a really good job explaining what it was like through 4 generations. A lot of Koreans left Korea because the conditions were so horrible that they went to Japan for a quote-unquote better life. But once they got there, they realized that the discrimination and the racism was just as strong, if not stronger. And so a lot of Koreans weren't able to get jobs. So a lot of them resorted to crime or just jobs that were really frowned upon. So one of the industries that they talk about is called pachinko. And pachinko is basically a form of gambling, and that is how this particular family made their money. If you were ever curious about Japanese and Korean history at that time, I think that this book can give you a better reflection on what that was like, because it's clearly not talked about. So my next book is a memoir. It is called What I Know for Sure by Oprah Winfrey. I freaking love Oprah. I love everything that she stands for, and she is just a huge role model for me. And this book is all the life lessons that she knows for sure. And I think that this book is just filled with wisdom. Whenever I'm feeling uninspired or unmotivated, this is also a book that I love to keep on standby because it just reinvigorates my love for life, and I just like her positive outlook on life as well. There's so many parts of this book that I just want to quote. I highly recommend this book if you love Oprah because it will not disappoint you. So my next book recommendation is called Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I first heard of Trevor Noah when he took over The Daily Show, and honestly I didn't think much of him, but my mind completely changed when I heard his interview on Oprah's podcast. I was like, oh my god, he is so funny, so charming, and he also came out with his book, so that's what kind of pushed me to read it. His story is so interesting because he was born in South Africa during the apartheid, and an apartheid is basically a law where people outside of each other's race cannot have sex or marry. So if you were black, you had to marry a black person. If you were white, you had to marry a white person. So Trevor Noah was born a crime because his mom was a black Xhosa woman and his dad was a white Swiss man. So his existence was a crime, and he explains a lot of the socio-political issues in the book, and he weaves it in with a lot of his personal funny stories about, you know, like his mom and like his first crushes. I smashed this memoir in a matter of days, and I just found it really interesting because I never considered looking at history outside of America, and so learning about South African history was super eye-opening, and I loved that it was in his voice. So my last book favorite is called The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. And this is the story of resilience, and it highlights how racist and fucked up the criminal justice system is in America. In 1985, Anthony Ray Hinton was sentenced to death row for 2 crimes he did not commit. Even though there was an overwhelming amount of evidence to prove that he was innocent, the all-white jury in Alabama found him guilty. So Hinton spends 30 years in death row just fighting for his innocence, and he manages to bring light and kindness in such a dark and desolate environment. And he eventually gets out, but dude, it was not easy. I mean, thank God for Bryan Stevenson. This memoir is honestly like the ultimate story of the underdog rising up and getting justice. Alright guys, that is a wrap on the 10 books that you should read this year. If you have any book recommendations that you think I should read, please leave them in the comments down below. One of my random goals for 2019 is to attempt to read 50 books this year. So we'll see how I do. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye! Mwah.